The Curse of the White Wing, The Legend of Albatross. Part 1, The Cursed Ship Mary Jane. The tale began in an ancient harbor redolent of salt and burnt tobacco, a port where the sun of truth had not entered for decades. Captain Sacker was a hard-bodied man, a deep scar that cut his face from his forehead to his chin like an abyssal valley, glassy eyes that knew neither sleep nor mercy. Sacker decided to set sail at a time when the elders warned of the storms of the Strait of Darkness, where ships were swallowed up and memories were erased. The Mary Jane sailed through the huge waves, and the sailors whispered about a bad omen they had seen the night before. Suddenly, in the thick fog that enveloped the ship like an iron shroud, a giant Patris emerged. Its wingspan was 3 meters, white as snow, flying in a strange silence over the ship's mast. It was not flapping its wings, but gliding with the wind like a lost soul watching their destiny. Part 2, The Bullet That Choked the Wind. 3 days have passed, and the bird does not leave the sky of the ship, following it as its shadow sleeps in the air and wakes up before everyone else. The sailors revere his presence, feed him pieces of bacon, and think that he is the lucky amulet that brings the good wind. But Captain Sacker, with madness beginning to creep into his veins due to late arrival, pulled out his antique rifle in a blind fit of rage. The old sailor shouted, "Amin, don't, Captain!" Killing Albatross means losing the soul at sea forever. A rock did not care, and the bullet went out to pierce the white bird's chest. Albatross fell on the deck with a muffled voice, from which he did not cry, but looked at the captain, with one last glance with human eyes full of sadness and reproach. At that moment, the wind died completely. The sea dwelled like a puddle of black oil, and the ship froze in place like a painting painted in the heart of nothingness. Part 3, Whisper of the Dead at the Bottom of the Ocean. A week had passed and the ship had not moved an inch. The sun was setting its scorching whips on the skins of the sailors, and the provisions began to run out and rot. But strangely enough, the bird's carcass did not decay, but grew whiter and glowing as the darkness grew. On quiet nights, the sailors began to hear sounds coming from under the hull of the ship. It was not the sounds of waves hitting, but the sounds of whispering the sailors' names one by one in a funerary accent. Sacker would see in his nightmares the murdered bird transformed into a giant man in the captain's clothes, asking him to price the wing. Hallucinations began to tear everyone's minds, and the first assistant swore he saw the bird's corpse floating in the ship's passages in the middle of the night, leaving behind a trail of salt and blood. Part 4, The Heavy Death Necklace. Conditions deteriorated terrifyingly, as the first healthy sailor died mysteriously, and in the morning they found him a lifeless corpse whose body had completely dried out of the water like a mummified centuries ago. In a miserable and superstitious attempt to lift the curse, Captain Sacker decided to tie the corpse of Albatross around his neck, using heavy iron chains, believing that this communion would restore the wind. But the disaster began here. The weight was increasing by the hour abnormally. It was not the weight of feathers and bones, but the weight of the souls of all the shipwrecked who passed through this path. A rock began to bend under the weight of the bird, and its skin began to be shed by the action of chains, while the eyes of the dead bird opened and closed with every move the captain made. Part 5, The Ghost Ship and the Mirage. On the 10th day, another ship appeared on the horizon. The sailors shouted in joy and thought that help had arrived. The ship was approaching at lightning speed despite the absence of wind. But as it approached, they discovered the horrific truth. It was not a rescue ship, but a replica of their ship Mary Jane, but shattered, its sails torn like sails, and on its deck they saw themselves, lifeless bodies lying everywhere. Omar and the sailors realized that they had entered a cursed time loop, and that the sea had decided to show them their future before it unfolded. The ghost ship passed by silently, and the captain piloting it was Rock himself, but he was a skeleton wearing a pendant of albatross feathers. Part 6, The Salt That Eats Bones. Seawater gradually began to turn into dense salt, until it became difficult to pull the grasshoppers out of it. Thirst gave everyone a mass hysteria, and some sailors began to drink salty seawater, which added to their madness. One of them jumped into the water screaming that he saw his city beneath the bottom. But as soon as he came into contact with the water, he turned into a salt statue in just seconds. Captain Sacker was watching all this while helpless. The chains that attached him to the bird began to fuse with his flesh, and white feathers began to sprout from the pores of his skin. He no longer knows whether he is Captain Sacker or the bird he killed. Maritime justice has begun to apply its harsh sentences. Part 7, The Secret Room in the Hollow of the Ship. In a fit of desperation, the remaining sailors decided to smash the captain's closet in search of an exit or a secret map. They found a hidden room under the office floor, containing hundreds of small bottles. In each bottle, there was a human breath locked up. They discovered that Sakar was not an ordinary captain, but rather a spirit hunter who would kill birds to trap the souls of the sailors and sell them to dark merchants. The box Omar found in the previous novel was linked to this secret. The bird killed by Sakar was not just a bird, but carried the spirit of Sakar's father himself, who tried to stop him from committing this crime. The shock made what was left of the captain's mind completely evaporate. Part 8. Black Storm. Suddenly, the sky turned from a scorched yellow to a charcoal black. The wind did not come from outside, but emanated from the hollow of the ship itself. The ship began to circle itself in a giant vortex that opened up in the heart of the ocean. The waves were not water, but thousands of blackbirds formed as a loud wave. The dead bird hanging on a rock chest cried out with a loud human voice. "Now, all feathers will be back in place," the nails began to come out of the ship's wood, and the boards separated as if to be freed from her prison. The ship, Mary Jane, was literally disintegrating, sailors plunging into the abyss one by one. Part 9. Confrontation in the Isthmus of the Seas. Sakar found himself alone on a small piece of wood in the center of the vortex. There was no longer a sea, no sky, but a vast symbolic space. Albatross appeared to him again, but this time he was a huge light being that filled the horizon. The being told him, "I gave you 100 chances to know that life is sacred, but you chose the bullet. Now you will rule this dead sea as a servant of the souls you have stolen." The chains began to pull a rock towards the abysmal bottom, and as he descended down, the images of his victims passed before his eyes like a terrifying movie tape. He felt the cold of water entering his lungs, but he did not die, for the curse required him to live forever by drowning. The 10th and final part, the port no one reaches. After many years, it is said that sailors in the Strait of Darkness sometimes see a ship of mist, led by a man with white feathers covering his face, and on his chest a flightless bird. They call him the guardian of the curse of Albatross. As for the old port, it has completely disappeared from the maps and has become just a legend to tell to warn the fishermen against vanity. The story ends with the sound of a single feather falling from the sky on the deck of a new ship whose journey has just begun, beginning the cycle anew. The sea is unforgettable, and Albatross always comes back to take his right.